Can you give me a concise version of what your argument is as to why you think that it's not a paradox that there's egalitarianism if men are affording the rights to women?
How is that a paradox if men are
Well,
affording the rights to women?
well, because the word is egalitarianism. You know what that means, right?
I never used the word egalitarianism.
Well, then you're straw manning my argument, because my
No, I'm
argument is
not
about
strawmanning your argument.
egalitarianism, not rights,
I'm not
equality.
straw manning your
Well,
argument at all.
then, well, so here you are, because it's about egalitarianism. Men and women can't ever be equal. It's not fucking possible. It's paradoxical to say that the people you have to go to demand your or to ask them to benevolently bequeath unto you rights, that you're equal with those people. That's a paradox.
Well, then we have to define what those rights are, right?
Well, who cares what you define them as? It doesn't matter what you.
But okay,
It wouldn't matter if it's a right to a Snicker bar. So what are you talking about?
So the rights that we have right now, right, that women have, same as men. All right. So that also gets enforced. You're not going to impede on a woman's right to pursue happiness or liberty or whatever it is that she wants. You're not going to impede on a woman's rights to do any of that bullshit. So there is an enforcement mechanism there. And there are certain things that are listed that are there. So to say that it's something that is given to us by men, it's not, because we're operating under natural law now. You understand that, right?
Are we operating under natural law, or are we operating under constitutional law?
Constitutional law is natural law.
What makes it natural?
What are you talking about?
What makes it natural?
Natural rights that come out of it.
What makes these rights natural? What makes them natural? What makes them natural?
That you signed a pact with the state or whatever society you're living with.
Why is that natural?
Why is it not?
Well, I mean, you're begging the question at that point. So I asked you the question.
Are you trying to conflate that with human law?
Well, no, you conflated
human law. So I said, you can give it up to God. You can say God, because as long as you exist as a human by nature, you can, as long as people don't try to kill you or anything like that, and in justice or injustice, typical things like that, then you're fine. That's
well. What rights do you think God gives you then?
Whatever people believe in religion.
So
it depends on what religion, and most of the stuff comes from Eastern religions, anyways. Like ancient Judaism, like Roman societies, Greek societies. They all had that style.
Okay, so when you're talking about constitutional law, you're saying that constitutional law is an extension of natural law. And what do you consider natural law to be?
Well, it's not an extension of natural law. It's an extension of natural rights.
Okay, what do you consider natural rights to be? Where are they coming from?
Given and protected under a government or whatever civilization you're living in.
So these are
whatever laws that are governed. So whatever laws, you can't kill people, you can't steal from people, stuff like that. You get locked up for.
So your rights, right? so your rights ultimately are coming from people.
Yeah, just like the same people that make up the schools. And
so if we're going to delineate, got it. So if we're going to make a delineation as to which group of this people's makeup are the ones who are the enforcers of these rights, which people have made up, which person group would you say out of the two sexes are the most responsible for that enforcement mechanism?
Those who are allowed to vote and participate in the government system.
Well, not every country you can vote, right?
Well, yeah. Okay. So what country are we specifically talking about?
Well, who cares? It doesn't matter. Just as far as a conceptualization. Okay, so
we'll talk about the United States. This is a country I know. I'm not familiar with other countries. So let's talk about.
So women got the vote in 1919, right?
Doesn't mean they weren't influential.
Well, who gave it to them? Who gave them the vote?
Oh, he was what do you call it? Men.
Yeah, men gave him the vote. So thing
is, who made up the government? Who made up majority of the government?
Men.
Okay, perfect.
Who makes up the majority of the government now?
Still men.
Yeah, so it's always men.
The crux of the argument is, listen, I agree. I already agree with you that men can act as the enforcement mechanism, right? But what I don't disagree is.
So then you have a paradox.
What are you talking about?
So if women can't enforce their rights and they have to get their rights from men have to grant them their rights because they're the enforcers, then it's paradoxical to say they're equal.
If you want to talk about it comes from a system of participation. So if you're talking about before women getting the ability to vote and things like that, then fine, you have a point and I'll concede that to you. But if you're talking about after women got the right to vote, they participate in the electoral process, whether it's local, state, federal, it doesn't matter. So whatever they choose to vote for, whatever is their self-interest, they essentially have an enforcement mechanism, which is the power to vote. So if we're talking about in today's time, then yes, women do have an enforcement mechanism to be able to impact their will. That's it.
So let's say a woman votes that she wants to be able to have abortions, that women kind of collectively come around and they vote that in. And let's just say, for the sake of this this argument, you're in, like, let's say Afghanistan or something. But even here in the United States, it would apply. Let's say that men said, yeah, you voted for that, but we're still not going to let you have abortions. Do you think women could still have abortions?
That goes against the legal process.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Do you think that women would still be able to have abortions if men said you can't have any more?
If we're arguing in the United States, then if the women vote and all of a sudden people just want to overthrow it, if the men collectivize and say that wouldn't work.
Why wouldn't it work?
Because the way the system is set up.
The system is set up at the whims of men.
What?
The system is set up at the whims of men. If men decide if the men decide collectively that the system is no longer applicable, it's no longer applicable.
Well, that doesn't happen though.
It does happen. It not only does it, not only no, it's happened twice here. It's happened twice in the United States.
What country we're talking about?
I'm talking about the United States. Talking about the United States.
Okay,
it's happened twice in the United States.
A group of men collectivizing to try to take over the government. It's damn near impossible.
No, it's happened twice. It's actually almost happened 4 different times. But the first time it happened, the first time was 1776. You know what happened then? Then the second time was during the Civil War. And in that point, they were extremely successful. They formulated their own government, an entire Southern government, and made their own new Charter of Rights and completely rejected the rights of the North.
Right, but you're still talking about when the country was in its infancy and it was still developing. You're always going to have those civil unrest.
The late 1800s was not infancy.
Listen, what you're describing happens to multiple different.
The late 1800s was not infancy.
But if we're gonna, here's the thing. If we're gonna, but what you're explaining is what happens to countries at their early stages. There's usually a split off from their original colonial masters or colonial superiority, and then there's some kind of civil war fostered. Yes, that's always. Listen, that's always the case.
So yeah, but so what? What?
African countries right now.
What?
Hang on. Well, so what? It just
what?
Goes back on your point that you're making. And you don't
no, it doesn't.
Yes,
how?
It does.
Well, then tell me that part.
The point I'm making is this stuff happens when countries are in their infancy. So you're gonna have those early stages of destabilization. But over time, as a country forms their laws and they forms and they're strengthening.
So what?
So what? So what is there safeguards put in place to prevent against that? Why do you think all those 2 times that shit didn't happen anymore?
And if men decide that those safeguards aren't there anymore, they won't be there.
Well, then, but here's the thing. The only difference is those same men have a huge wall of bureaucracy they have to fight through to even make that happen.
No,
it doesn't take them just collecting a bunch of guns. It doesn't take a brute strength to walk up into the government and say, well, I'm going to take it over because, we're sick and tired of the system.
They've done it. It's been done globally more times than you can count.
17, whatever, bro.
No, that's recent. That's the Shah of Iran. What are you talking about? The Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran, Afghanistan.
Iran right now, we're talking about the United States.
What I'm saying is that if this can happen, dude. If this can happen there, why couldn't it happen here?
Because we're well established.
They were more well established.
Do you know how destabilized
the United States is? One of the youngest nations on planet Earth, sir. One of the youngest nations.
Exactly my point. What I was saying earlier, this bullshit only happens to young nations in their infancy.
This is one of the youngest nations on planet Earth.
It's difficult for men to do that. So if we're going back to the West. The idea of the West, a bunch of dudes who are all of a sudden sick and tired of, the way the government's running and they take up arms to overthrow it. It's not going to happen because the government's way too established. So when you're making my point, it's only in younger countries when they're highly influenced and in their infancy that insurrections and you have the changing of guard and civil wars that happen. But when we get into established nations, there's safeguards put in place because they learned from their lessons when they were in their infancy. That's how they work. So what you might have a case back in the day, but in today, you're wrong. Women do have an enforcement mechanism. It's called the federal government.
You mean men?
Which is largely men and women. So it's not solely men.
Well, no, it's mostly men who are the enforcers, though. So politicians
Well,
don't.
now you got
See,
women in the police forces,
politicians,
in the military.
politicians don't enforce laws, right?
They create. Well, no. Time out. Okay. One branch create laws, the other one judges it, and the executive one sort of.
They're all non sequiturs. I don't care about who enforces
so now
the
they're
laws.
Non sequiturs. Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, they're not addressing my argument, which is who you can say who makes the laws, and I would agree with you who makes laws, but who enforces the laws?
The government.
Yeah, but
that's holding.
If you were to
sign a contract with the when you sign a contract with the state, aka your citizenship, you're basically going into a societal agreement. All right, you agree to give up a certain amount of your rights, and in exchange for that, we will protect whatever is left of yours. All right, so that's the whole thing. So if anyone, meaning any other human being, all right, that breaks the laws, meaning they accost you in some kind of way, where they steal from you, or they try to kill you or your family members, all right, your rights will be enforced by the state because that's the contract you signed. So they act as the enforcer. Now, if you want to get into the weeds of who are the people actually going in and arresting these people or doing the investigations, yeah, you can have a say and say, yeah, the majority of them are men, right? Because they make up the police forces and they make up the military and things like that. But doesn't negate the fact that there are women in these positions too. Not only that, there are women that serve atop of those hierarchies that enable the enforcement of the rights of other people.
So we've established then that men are largely the enforcement arm of rights and laws that politicians
They're
pass.
largely, but not solely.
I didn't say they're solely. I just said
in the last argument, it kind of seemed like you were hinting at that because you didn't say it.
So largely,
just
they are.
Be specific.
Largely, they are, right? You agree with that? So if that's true,
yeah, I agree with that 100%.
So if those men,
it's a no-brainer. Largely, they are.
So if those men decide that they're going to stop enforcing those laws by the government, if they just decide to do that, let's say they go on strike or something like this,
which department?
Or the police force,
the Army, Navy, police.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. Like, let's just take a look at the riots that happened, the BLM riots that happened. If police forces are told to stand down, right? There's nobody around to enforce your rights. Who's there to enforce your rights when someone's throwing a brick through your window? Who's there to enforce your rights when neighborhoods are getting burned down? Who's there to do that if people decide not to enforce your rights for you?
Well, you know what actually happens in those cases? Especially in those cases where anarchy starts to form. All right.
If men with guns enforce their own.
Right. So you get people who come out with guns and they enforce it, right?
Yeah, men.
And those men can enforce it on behalf of what? To protect
themselves.
Their families, right?
Yeah.
And those families usually include moms, daughters, sisters, aunties, right? So one can argue that they're being influenced by that because they don't.
Who cares who they're influenced by? They're the enforcers, bro.
To be hurt, right? So there's a motivation to enforce
that
right if the government fails. So either way, it's not still solely men. Even if men decide today that collectively we're going to go to war against women, hypothetically speaking, I mean, it's never going to happen. But if in that case, the reason why it'd be impossible because there would be other men who would stand up and fight against that. By definition, and even biologically speaking,
so that's my
argument. The enforcement arm of women. So
then I'm right.
So we're exactly that's the point. But in your argument, you were saying you were making it seem like it was solely men. If men decide to collectivize and take the rights, it still doesn't.
It is solely men, because what you're saying is that men would have to be the ones who stopped other men from taking away women's rights. So it's solely men, bro.
By their women.
It's still solely men.
By their women.
Who they're influenced by doesn't matter.
It does kind of matter because your reasoning for doing something kind of makes sense. You wouldn't just do something for nothing now, would you? You wouldn't just take up arms and defend what?
What their motive, bro? What their motivation is irrelevant. The fact is that all women's rights, all of women's rights are come from men because men are the enforcers of the rights. You agree that that's true. You agree that when anarchy,
let me finish, Duke. Have enforcement mechanisms.
Duke,
that's
let me finish.
Let me finish. Enforcement mechanism are men.
Let me finish my point.
And in modern societies, women as well.
Are you ready to let me finish my point? You tell me when I can finish my point. I just let you go on your whole diatribe, and I didn't even interrupt it. So just hang tight. You agree with me on these.
Dude, chill, bro.
You agree with me on these concepts. The conceptualization here is that men are the enforcers of rights. You agree that that's true. You agree that it would necessarily take men to stop other men from taking away women's rights. We also agree that that's true. So no matter which way you cut this, the rights of women come from men. And so therefore egalitarianism or true equality is impossible. It can't be done because it's always just begging men for the rights. And you can say, but women can influence men to act as their safeguard for rights. That's true. They could do that. They could use sexuality or bribes or any number of different mechanisms to do that. But they're still utilizing men as the enforcement mechanism for their fucking rights. You can't get away from this. It's circular.
So, okay, but like, okay, here you go again. All right. But it's not largely men, though. You got to understand that, because when we're talking about governments, it's a system, meaning there's men and women. So you would have that. There's a wall of bureaucracy there that includes both men and women when we're talking about governmental societies, right? So there are women that play a part. Some of them, if they're higher up in the hierarchy, right, they play a higher role in the enforcement of certain rights, and they use men. So if you want to talk about using men as the strong arm, right? Yeah, you're right. But if we're talking about overall, yeah, women have a heavy influence in enforcing their rights.
Well, they have. You can say that women can influence men to enforce their rights for them, and I wouldn't disagree with you.
And I think still that's using it.
I think that's possible, but who are they relying on? They're not relying on them. They're relying on men. So still, it's due to the benevolency of men that women have rights, and the opposite isn't true. The opposite's not true. So we don't need women to enforce our rights. That's the distinction, and that's why you can't have egalitarianism.
I disagree.
You disagree that we need women to enforce men's rights?
Yeah, because if you're voting, what do you think? 50% of women are the other half of the voting block. What are you talking about?
So again,
it's men and women that got abortion banned.
The vote is allowed because
women took away men and women due to certain beliefs work together to remove the rights of other women. It's the same thing can happen backwards. We don't just work in a system that requires brute strength of men. We work in a system that has working pieces that involve both men and women. And some of those women are in leadership positions, which have a bigger influence when it comes down to affecting other people's rights and influencing and enforcing their rights as well. So for you to, because it seems like you're making.
Who enforces their right to vote? Who enforces their right to vote? Who? Which sex enforces their right to vote, Duke?
The government.
Which sex enforces their right to vote? Overwhelmingly. Which one? Which one is it?
Both sex.
Both sex overwhelmingly are the enforcement arm, huh?
Well, if you're talking about sex, well, we're gonna talk about who majority is in office, right? We'll say men.
No, the enforcement. Who's going to enforce the woman's right to vote? Okay, it's going to be men. It's going to be fucking men.
We're talking about the police force.
All of them. All enforcement arms.
We can agree that it's largely men in these positions and roles, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then now we're getting to a conversation in terms of what men naturally gravitate to versus what women naturally gravitate to in terms of work, right? And that'd be based off of biology, because men biologically fill up these roles, right?
Yeah.
Protective roles, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Fill other roles that are support structures, right?
Yeah.